Hi, Don.
Hey, how's it going?
Speak up a little bit there
Yeah.
and we'll be ready to go. Let me
Okay.
just get your volume up a bit if you don't mind.
Okay. I don't,
Yeah, I can barely hear you. Let me
you,
just, wait, no, that's better. All right. Thank
okay.
you very much.
Sure. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Okay, here we are. Charles Moskowitz. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Live Monday through Friday, Eastern Standard Time, um, at all of the various venues and platforms that are carrying the program. And that number is expanding. I want to welcome aboard Sprecher today is my latest venue. Don Jeffries is my guest, and Don is the author of many interesting books here. Don, you've got a whole shelf of books, including Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover ups in American politics, Survival of the Richest, Crimes and Cover Ups. You started out as a researcher working with Mark Lane for the Kennedy assassination, he being one of the classic, and I think really one of the first significant people to really start to open that case up in the 1970s, I believe. And so, Don, I mean, obviously, we have to start out by talking about the most significant story of our day and the most significant story of every 4 years, which is the inauguration of a new president and vice president of the United States. Um, I congratulate President Biden and Vice President Harris. Even though I may be in the loyal opposition, I wish them well because I wish the country well. I'll criticize them when they're wrong and I'll praise them when they're right. I will continue to insist that the election was stolen, and I'm not going to stop talking about that. I'll continue to research it because if we don't get to the bottom of that, we're never going to have another free election. However, having said that, I do recognize them as president and as vice president of the United States. I'm not going to do that, the left wing thing about saying, he's not my president and that kind of thing. So, Don, I'd like you to reflect on these issues in your mind today.
Well, yeah, it's we were living in surreal times. I I also write science fiction, and I'm still trying to get more of my fiction. I've had much better success with my nonfiction, but I like apocalyptic fiction. And it's hard to write now because we're kind of living through something that's stranger than fiction. So I right as I speak, it's about 12 o'clock p.m. So right now, Biden is supposed to be inaugurated. So there are still probably millions of Americans out there that are literally expecting a last second effort from Trump or somehow manipulating from Florida or wherever he is to turn the troops on Biden or whatever on the deep state. I don't know, but
No, 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 no.
it's obviously not going to happen. But it's what's most interesting is what's going to happen after. I've talked about this many times. What will happen after Trump to both sides? Because what's left, I mean, and the left is where I should be, and I'm not welcome there now because these people are just absolutely insane. You can't have a conversation with people that think there are 57 genders. I don't know how you can't reason with them. So those are the people that have taken over the left. And so there is no, if Mark Lane was alive today, as you mentioned, my mentor, a civil libertarian, he wouldn't, I don't know what he'd be doing. He certainly wouldn't be with him, I don't think. And as a civil libertarian, I believe in free speech. They don't. And they're talking about they may want to prosecute who knows how many people that were Trump supporters, which is just unbelievable to me. But what will happen after Trump? I suspect that Trump will continue to be on the periphery, will hold rallies and just do the same stuff he did while he was office, basically, tweet if he ever gets back to tweeting and not do anything, which is was his presidency. But if he isn't, if he somehow decides to do, what would be more, I think, rational to just leave it all behind and just go live the life of a billionaire, I don't know what the left will do without him because they have made him. They've made him there. I've compared him many times to Emmanuel Goldstein in Orwell's 1984. Where he was the fake opposition leader, and they would put his face on screen, and the party members would go every day, and they'd have a 2-minute hate. And only with Trump, it's
Yeah.
24/7 hate. So without their Goldstein, I don't know. Maybe they may transfer the hatred onto all the supporters, but that's 75 million people. I don't know how you can do that, but maybe they'll do that. And of course, the right is completely lost now because they put all their apples into one basket. They went after this they bought into this personality, And the whole Q thing, most of the biggest podcasts that I've been on over the years were Q centric, were people, because they had the biggest fan base by far.
Right, for sure.
And so and I don't know what they're going to do, because so many, these are good people, but they bought into it. They're vested into it. Obviously, the plan is gone. There were no arrests. There were no sealed indictments. There were no perp walks. It's ludicrous to still, but I don't know. Maybe they're somehow going to maintain it with Biden in office, but I don't know how you go on, because Trump, his personality completely took over and transformed American politics, made it all about him. So with him gone, I hope the left, a lot of my friends in the JFK assassination community, especially, regain their sanity and realize that George W. Bush isn't a good guy, and the intelligence agency shouldn't be trusted, because that's what they did, because they went against Trump. So as long as you went against Trump, you were cool. And I've said, I've been on the record that I think that if Adolf Hitler could come back today and just walk around American society, he could literally anything, he would redeem his reputation completely. All he'd have to do is criticize Trump and say Trump was horrible. And that would be it.
No, that's a great observation. And I think that this cult of Trump haters is so over the top and so bizarre that you're right. I mean, I had the same thought maybe a week ago, and I was thinking, what are they going to do now if Trump's leaving town? I mean, where is all? I mean, their entire existence seems to be based upon building up this hate, and in fact, we could even more broadly say that that's what the left does. I mean, they have to have an enemy to hate. That's why Adolf Hitler picked the Jews. Because he was a good communistic leftist. And in order to advance their agenda, whatever it may be, they need to have an object to vent their spleen on. And I don't know what they're going to do now that President Trump has retired. I mean, I've heard rumblings that they're going to continue to investigate him.
Yeah.
I mean, the New York Attorney General, whose entire career seems to be focused on getting Trump, they're investigating, him, every family member, every business, anyone who ever was seen with him in a hotel lobby. I mean, is going to be investigated in New York State. And I think that more troubling than that, and that's just, they'll chase him down right to the grave. I mean, they're going to try to put him in jail. I mean, is the fact that they very well may, and in fact, there's evidence that they're going to go after anyone who's ever supported President Trump.
Yeah.
And that includes me. Yeah. And we're going to be censored. We're going to be marginalized. They came up with this final narrative that somehow he was responsible for an insurrection, which means that he's a terrorist, and as are we all. Yeah. And in spite of the fact that more and more evidence is coming out that, as I said a week before the rally in Washington, that it was going to be threaded with Antifa people dressed in Trump garb. That doesn't matter. The fact is, they're going to stick with this was their final denouement, their final lie, that as he's leaving the door, their final attempt to try to take him down, and by extension, all of the rest of us. Now, having said all this, I want to be clear. I recognize Joe Biden as the president of the United States and Kamala Harris as the vice president of the United States. They've been sworn in. I respect our Constitution. I respect our system of government. I am moved by it, actually. I feel proud that we have gone through another transfer of power peacefully and that everything went peacefully. I'm grateful for that. And I think that is the hallmark of the greatness of our nation. We haven't had violent revolutions. We haven't had coups d'etats, at least not in the violent sense. We could argue whether or not Trump won, and I do believe he did by an overwhelming margin. However, Biden is now president, and I recognize it. Having said that, I do think we have to continue to investigate the election fraud. We have to get rid of the Dominion voting machines. I don't care if they say that they were not problematic. We can't have electric voting. That's too open to fraud. Most countries in the world have not done it, and they've gotten rid of it. And we have to do it the old-fashioned way. We have to have people observers on both parties in the open, sitting at a table with the media there, counting every single vote so that this doesn't happen again. And we have to have national ID.
Well, and you have to, I mean, Europe, because we are, I'm calling America now the wealthiest banana republic the world's ever seen. I think we're totally third world. And our elections certainly are. You know, if you look at the way Europe conducts their elections, they don't allow mail-in ballots, and
Right.
they require a photo ID for
Exactly.
obvious reasons. For obvious reasons.
No, I mean, in Mexico, you actually have to have a fingerprint when you go vote.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of these so-called third Venezuela. I talked to somebody that was in an election years ago, and that I think it was Venezuela or one of the nations down there, where they just simply just to prevent people from voting more than once, they treated you like if you enter a bar, they just made you take a thumbprint, you know, basically put your thumb in ink, so they would know you can't come back. I mean, it's a very simple precaution, but we apparently can't do that. But I think
we can't do it because we had this phony AstroTurf group funded by George Soros called the Brennan Institute that pushed this idea that somehow having voter ID meant you had something against black men.
It's racist, exactly, and it's so demeaning.
It itself is racist. I mean,
yeah,
what are we saying?
exactly.
A black person is not, you know, this kind of like
doesn't have an ID.
Yeah, this kind of paternalistic,
absolutely,
old Rudyard Kipling white man's burden view of black people, that somehow they're like That's children. Right. Yes, everybody can get an ID. They should be made free. I agree with that. You know, in October, Nancy Pelosi salted into the COVID-19 stimulus bill. I think it was like several $1 billion for election reform. Fine. You know, out of that money, you know, which all probably goes to pockets of their friends.
Yeah.
We could put in a little bit of money to make sure that every American can get a photo ID for free, right, and make it easy and make it accessible. It's not brain surgery. It can be done.
Absolutely. And it's the idea that, and you're exactly right. And this is what I most fear about what's happening now is that we, because you end up like, you know, I end up sounding like a white nationalist or something. And that's not my intention. But the problem is I am white. I have white children. I'll probably have white grandchildren one day. I don't want them growing up in a country where they're basically, you know, figuratively sent to the back of the bus. And I think this is what is happening is that they are, I mean, you know, when you have, you know, the demeaning, the thing we can't say, and you know, either stereotypes and generalization are wrong. As people like me, who I grew up a liberal, I used to listen to the speeches of Martin Luther King, and obviously I love the Kennedys. So I believe that stereotypes are wrong. That if you said, you know, all blacks are stupid or all blacks are lazy or whatever, which a lot of people did back then, that right. It wasn't right to demean a whole race. But the problem is now, of course, you can't say anything literally about, you know, you can't say that a particular black is ugly, for instance, or something. Then somehow you're a racist. So it gets to, but you can say whatever you want about whites, and you don't have to say some whites. It's, you know, like whites are racist, whites are this or that. And it's like, so you're talking about generalizing there. Why is it okay for you to do that? I mean, it's the same thing where you're not going to get in trouble if you say, you know, trailer park trash or white trash. That's fine. Perfectly acceptable. We saw that with Anderson Cooper, the CIA intern, who demeaned the entire crowd of Trump supporters by saying, oh, they're going to go back to eat at Olive Garden and go back to Holiday Inn. Now, just change that to a Black Lives Matter crowd. And what would have happened to a reporter that said, oh, they're going to go back to Popeye's fried chicken? I mean, he would have been fired before he could drop the microphone. I mean, that's so you can't.
Well, they base it on the idea of white privilege, and that somehow being white in this country gives you advantages, and that there's kind of secretive, sort of almost subconscious racial profiling of people who are not white. And you know, I think there is some truth to that, but I think that the answer is not to do reverse racism. The answer is not to emphasize, you know, race identity, because different people relate to their race or non-race in any way they want. And that this whole business of the, you know, the kind of the microaggression theory, which is really used as a weapon against anyone that's not on the left, that it's basically fanning the flames of racial division, and that maybe it very well may lead to a white supremacist backlash among probably more poor white men
Right.
younger men who feel disenfranchised and who feel shut out
Sure.
and who feel that they're getting opportunities taken away from them. And I wonder if the whole enterprise isn't being deliberately set up that way to
Mhm.
create division. You know,
Yeah.
we've always heard about how the Russians back in the Kremlin times and even probably today, and how communism tries to sow division and anger and conflict in a society that they target. In
Divide
fact,
and conquer.
this is what communism is: class conflict. Instead, they replaced class conflict with race conflict. You had who was the philosopher? Franz Fanon, the Marxist philosopher from Barbados, I think, who wrote the book called "The Wretched of the Earth," where he said in the 1960s that the new paradigm, the new dialectic for communism would not be class conflict, but race conflict, and
Right.
that so we have an agenda here which is going to exacerbate, which forces people to identify themselves based upon race, which is a false construct anyway. And then once they do so, it pits them against each other.
Right.
So we have to reject both sides, but we also have to take a look at the motive, who benefits,
Oh,
what is the motivation behind that kind of
well,
thing. But
divide and
bringing things
conquer.
back to the election, again, I think that this idea that somehow voter ID is racist, that's racist. That's setting up a
Right.
false paradigm because everyone can get a basic ID so that we can ensure a principle that it used to be advocated by the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which is one man, one vote.
Right.
Wasn't that what
Right.
the Voting Rights Act was supposed to be all about in 1965?
Yeah, and that's the entire. I draw these analogies over and over again to the old left, where that rightly, obviously objected first of all to in the 50s. You had the witch hunt, where people were going after calling people commies and fellow travelers and reds and pinkos and all that. And it wasn't McCarthy that did that, by the way. It's historically inaccurate. That was the House Un-American Activities Committee, which nobody
Right.
talks about, which
Which
was
was which
which is
was a House committee, and McCarthy was a senator.
right.
And,
And
and by the
he
way, let's just touch on that a little bit, just for historical accuracy.
okay.
The House Un-American Activities Committee, which is actually called the House Committee on Un-American Activities,
Mhm.
it was set up in the late 1930s by Congressman Dick Stein and Congressman McCormick of Massachusetts to look at Nazis that had
Right.
infiltrated the government. And then after Pearl Harbor and after the United States became embroiled in World War II, the emphasis shifted to communists, both of which were involved in espionage and subversion inside the United States. Yeah, it was just that simple. It had nothing to do. Joe McCarthy came around later.
Right. But the thing was that they even the terminology that the right used in those days. I mean, I've seen people call Trump supporters subversives. The traitors thing is thrown
Oh
around
no,
constantly. Treason.
terrorists. I mean, I
Terrorists, yeah, it's the exact same thing, and they're and not only that, you have on that front, it's unbelievable to me that these are the people that, and these the exact same people that rightly wanted to us not to go to war with the Soviet Union. Now they're chanting Russia, Russia, Russia. They're demonizing the same group when they're not running half the
oh,
world like they.
it's the new Red Scare, and
Yeah,
it was the biggest deliberate conspiracy theory of our times. People criticize you, Don, as an author. They criticize me as being, like tin hat conspiracy. Talk about conspiracies. I mean, this was a officially sanctioned and promoted conspiracy theory that was about as weird as any that had been coming along the pike. And
yeah,
basically, what it comes down to is the accusation that Donald Trump was spying for Russia. Completely, utterly ridiculous and
yeah.
false. They spent, $40 million basically, putting people up against the wall and throwing them in prison for things that had not, and just terrorizing, frankly, an administration that was trying to proceed with the business it was elected to do and trying to hobble it. And that's what it was all about. It was really unbelievable.
Oh, the first state sanctioned conspiracy theory we've ever had, and this is the people. It's unbelievable to me when you have the establishment media promoting something. And yeah, I wrote many articles about this for the American Free Press, which I write for regularly. But so you not only had that, but you also have I've pointed this out many times, what the new left, or whatever you want to, the woke left, whatever they want to call themselves, the social justice warriors, they are also turning, they are basically the anti-civil rights movement, what they're doing now. They're turning civil rights. I mean, when you do things like run people out of restaurants, as they did to Sarah Huckabee Sanders and others, and the restaurant owner ran her out. And I said, the whole civil rights movement wasn't the purpose behind that is that the private business doesn't have a right to deny someone the right to eat there at the restaurant because of how they look. And that was the
Well,
whole
now,
idea. So,
I mean, now you have Harvard talking about rescinding
yes,
diplomas
yes,
of
yes.
people who were publicly supporting President Trump. And you've got, what do you think is going to happen with that, Don? Do you think that there really is going to be a major witch hunt? I mean, we already have seen the Parler app taken down. I mean, I think it's coming back, but it really had nothing to do with anybody breaching the Capitol. It was a conservative site that was competing with the big tech, particularly Twitter. And Twitter got together and conspired, I understand, with Google and Apple to take them down. And it was a huge website. It had picked up beyond Twitter even. And then of course they have censored the president of the United States, Donald Trump, who had, I think, probably 10, 20 million followers. They simply took him down and did so to a lot of other people. I mean, even taking down Parler. You're talking about people who had accounts on Parler and Twitter where they had hundreds of thousands of followers. Now they have been censored. No one is going to hear them now. It's like they've disappeared into the memory hole. We talked about George Orwell. I mean, this is complete.
And the same argument is used there. The left suddenly loves free enterprise because they thought, well, there's a private company. They don't have a right to. Okay, well then, restaurants are private companies. Stores are private companies. I don't want black people in here. Is that okay? Well, I mean, the analogy is the same. Why can't they do that when they can say, well, they're disproportionately represented in crime rates. So that's why I'm not going to have them. They might steal. And we'd recognize that you can't do that. But what to say, well, I don't want you on Twitter because you might say something hateful. You might inspire somebody. I mean, you either have free speech or you don't. But the left doesn't want free speech. And the left today, people like Mark Lane, Nat Hentoff, another great civil libertarian in the past, William O. Douglas, the last great Supreme Court justice we had, they would not recognize, not to mention the JFK and RFK, Martin Luther King, they would not recognize today's left. And they'd all be smeared, like I said, by his own words. Martin Luther King is a white supremacist by saying judge people by the content of their character, because you all aren't doing that. And JFK said race has no place in American life or law. So,
Exactly. The whole idea of transcending race and focusing on people's accomplishments, that in and of itself, I think they would probably call racist, as if somehow black people aren't accomplished. Who's really the racist? But here we are now with the new administration. We've talked about censoring opinions, which is really ugly in this country and which is something that should be troubling everybody. What else do you think we can expect from this establishment? Do you think that I don't think Joe Biden as a person is all that strong. I think he's elderly and I don't think he has full command of his faculties. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that as an observation. So that tells me that there are going to be people around him who are going to be calling the shots. Do you think that that's going to include people? I mean, are they going to go far left? Are they going to go like Sandy or Kez, whatever her name is, and start to, put together, enemies lists and have people prosecuted and not allowed to have, jobs? I mean, they're talking about anybody associated with the Trump administration not allowed to get into positions.
Talking about blacklisting, I mean, I hope
it could be worse, and it could get worse. What do you think is going to happen with all that?
I'm obviously frightened of that prospect, but I hope if history holds true, that rhetoric will not turn into reality. Now, but I don't know. The fact that people are proposing some of these things is mind-boggling. But I think our only hope is because, again, the Republicans being the stupid party that they are, I think the Republican Party is dead, by the way. There'll never be another Republican president, and they'll be marginalized to the point where hopefully another party, and hopefully it's populist libertarian, will fill the void. But as it stands right now, they're no opposition to what the one. Basically, we are in Orwell's one party. There's a party in power, and the opposition is loyal opposition. There's very few of them opposed to it. They want to get rid of the Josh Hawley types that that actually showed some promise because he spoke up against electoral fraud. So I hope, though, you mentioned AOC and people like, and the squad, people like that. I hope that the more radical ones in the Democratic Party, hopefully they'll form their own gridlock with the old guard, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chucky Schumers and people like that. I'm hoping, but I don't know. I mean, but and you had the old fashioned jealousy. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi wants to be large and in charge, and she may resent AOC and the younger people getting the press and acting like they're in charge. So I'm hoping they have the fight against themselves, but that's really our only hope, because I mean, I heard today that I fear this reparations nonsense, which is just going to talk about exacerbating the divide in this country. Not to mention, it's about as absurd an idea and unjust idea as possible. There's a guy in Oregon who has introduced a bill in Oregon. Keep in mind, Oregon was always a free state. No history with slavery, none. He's introducing a bill to give every, the African Americans in their state. Now, supposedly they're going to have to prove their ancestry from slavery. I don't believe that. $120,000 a year until they die. I mean, this is, and some of these people complain about welfare and wanting to help people that really need help. And you're going to give people $120,000 a year just because they're Black? And if that isn't divisive, what is it? And so if something like that passes, you can certainly look for California and New York, the most woke states, to follow suit.
I suppose we could have, people have blood tests to find out how much Black ancestry.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, what is going to be the one drop theory? I mean,
it's the same thing. They're going to use the same thing. Maybe it's the same. I mean, it's crazy. Maybe they'll have a sliding scale of reparations where, okay, you're half Black, so you get half. I mean, it's mind-boggling. How is that? Well, how is it supposed to bring the country together when you're calling Trump supporters and Trump, divisive for complaining about the election, but you're impeaching him again with, a couple days left? Like, that's not divisive.
I mean, look, I think that you've illustrated pretty well, Don, in a way, the possible takeover by the Democrats of the far left and the possible takeover of the Republican Party by the right. I think that actually is not a bad thing, in that we really will have a great ideological difference between the two parties. And if the Democrats are controlled by Bernie Sanders and the left, and they get rid of the moderate Democrats, and likewise Republicans, I find that interesting. I find that to be something that we actually can then have a real public debate in public square. I do think that there is a movement in this country that actually transcends Democrat and Republican, that is nationalist, populist, traditionalist, libertarian, and conservative. And it's kind of a coalition of those groups. And that the conservative side has always been much more diverse ideologically anyways. And I think that could eventually, that may be forming a new party. I don't know, or just, to get rid of the Mitt Romneys. I mean, you saw like, you had a couple of the rhinos actually vote for impeachment.
Yeah.
And in case of Lynn Cheney in Wyoming, she is now going to be primaried. I mean, she's being vilified. The party there has never seen such a reaction. And I think that could be actually a good thing, in that the Republican Party will either come to stand for several things that are real, or they will have to be, they'll go the way of the Whigs, and we'll have the new populist party or something. And likewise with the Democrats, they'll get rid of the Pelosi's. They will move. Now let's talk a little bit about Don Jeffries, what you think is coming down the pike in terms of the new Biden-Harris administration. And before we do that, let me give out the phone number. This is an open lines program. We do take calls. We take them live. Please observe community standards when you call. If you don't, I'm going to hang up very quickly. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. You're welcome to join myself, Charles Moscowitz, and my guest, Donald Jeffries, who is the author of a whole shelf of books at Amazon. So Donald, what do you see coming up in terms of the new administration right out of the gate?
Well, again, I don't see anything good. As you say, I would support it. You know, it's anybody. That's the way I treated Trump. But I just I couldn't have lower expectations in terms of it. I think that everything being pushed on Biden, and as you noted, I don't think Biden's in control. He's probably less in control than any president we've ever seen, simply
Right,
because he appears to have, I don't know if it's dementia or whatever. I mean,
right.
he's
He's not
almost
playing
80
with,
years.
he's
Yeah,
playing not playing with a full deck.
right, right. So he's got a very aggressive and ambitious vice president behind him. He's going to have a people around him that are the usual suspects. I mean, I've seen them, and none of them are good appointees. But to be fair, none of Trump appointees were good either. So, but they usually aren't. They appoint the same kind of CFR types that are that are career people that are indoctrinated into the
Swamp.
globalists to the
Yeah,
agenda. So that's what they're good. But we have to hope that it just turns into a if it's just what Obama did, because Obama was mostly sound and fury, signifying nothing, as well as Trump, not quite as much, but he didn't do anything really outlandish until near the end, DACA, that kind of thing. But other than that, if Biden does indeed give amnesty to all the illegal immigrants here, and that is, of all the disappointments of the Trump administration, by far the most disappointing. The fact that he didn't, that was our absolute last chance to close the barn door, because millions and millions, that's going to change the demographics officially in America, so that the Republican Party is voting itself into extinction with their lust for cheap labor. So you're going to do that. It's going to overtax the system, because these people are, and as I wrote about my book in Survival of the Richest, half of America, and that was 2017. It's gotten much worse now with the pandemic and everything, the lockdown and all this. Half of America had nothing then, less than 1% of the collective wealth, the bottom 50%. You have millions more people entering at the very bottom, which are what all these illegal immigrants are going to be. They're desperately poor. You're going to increase that bottom 50%. And you bring migrants in, you're going to increase that. You bring more H-1B visa workers, which again, Trump promised to end. Instead, the Senate voted unanimously last month to lift all caps on countries with H-1B foreign visa workers. You have millions less
that's
workers
going
than
to
you have.
hurt American, not just American labor, but American professional development. I mean, people who
Oh, doctors and
invested
yeah,
in the country and who went to college and spent, and got
right,
careers. They're going to have to compete with people coming in from India and China
right.
who will be hired because they're cheaper. I mean,
That's what it's all about, the lust for cheap labor. And it's amazing to me that the Republicans especially are so short-sighted to not see what the long-term problem with this is. And so what is happening is, because you have 20% at the top that is doing really well, including obviously the 1% is just doing imaginable, but there's 20% that are the professionals that manage this mess that do really well. The 80% below struggle in varying degrees. The bottom 50% has nothing. So that leaves you with about 30% that's barely clinging to what used to be America, the middle class. And that's what they're desperately squeezing out. That's why the lockdown was so devastating, because they got rid of so many mom and pop businesses, which is what they want. I mean, the fact that they didn't tell Walmart and Target and Home Depot, they were open the entire time, selling the same products as the 5 and 10 cent store that at point, almost gunpoint, was said, no, you cannot open. And when they tried to open up, you can see what happened. They sent the cops in, they tried to prosecute them, and nobody questions it. What if it's dangerous for a small store to be open? How is it not dangerous for a much bigger store with a larger group of shoppers in there?
also, let me just interject here. I've heard that Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York and Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago, both liberal Dems, are calling for the immediate reopening of their cities and their states. Now that the political situation has been resolved, now that Trump has been driven out of office
Yeah,
and sent home, now they suddenly want to reopen, which, by the way, shows a great venality, the fact that they might have, and I'm not saying they did, but that they might have actually extended the shutdown just for political reasons, to try to hurt the economy, to try to hurt Trump. I mean, how many people were hurt by that? How many suicides? How many children who had their education interrupted, and depression, and people not getting proper medical treatment and all the rest, just so they could get Trump out of office, if that's true. And I think that it probably is true.
yeah, it's absolutely. And it's, I mean, I've written a lot about it was obviously I think, a planned thing. That's why we call it a plandemic. And but so with everything that's happened, the country has been transformed so much within the last year because of that, because of and the fact that Charles, that they can do something like what we saw last summer. And I keep trying to throw examples, videos, words back into the faces of these people, my former friends on the left, and you cannot reason with them when I talk about, okay, look, I mean, you can look at Nancy Pelosi and all these other AOC, all of them saying these protests were necessary. Chris Cuomo, during the summer, Chris Cuomo says, whoever said that protests have to be nonviolent? And these are the exact same people.
I know. Talk about insurrections.
Yes.
Last summer they were there looting black businesses, burning black neighborhoods, and killing black people.
Nothing.
And all in the name of civil rights.
Absolutely.
And President Trump tried to call out the National Guard, but I mean he was so roundly criticized for doing that there were calls to have him put in prison for this. So he backed down. Now all of a sudden they've got 6,000 troops.
Yeah, and you have if you look at the video of the so-called insurrection at the Capitol, if you look at that, there are videos out there for anyone to see of the police waving people inside, going in, basically escorting them in.
We can revisit that one. I mean, I think that there were people, as the president might have said, there were people on both sides.
Sure, and there were people that the ones that broke windows.
I think the vanguard, the real activists, the ones who really were breaking down windows, were Antifa people, like this guy John Sullivan, and he was working completely along with that CNN photographer and journalist.
Yeah.
And and I think that Trump people followed them in, and including Proud Boys and the people dressed in all kinds of outfits, and we had some weird, kind of the Q people and people involved in the lizards people conspiracy and all this kind of stuff. Sure. And it just turned into a motley mess. But I think at the end of the day, we'll see who really were the main instigators.
Yeah, I mean, and it's whoever.
Back to the question of what's happening now. My understanding is that the new president is going to be signing a whole flock of executive orders undoing things that President Trump had done, and some of them are pretty troubling. Getting rid of the Keystone Pipeline. For the first time in modern American history, this country was energy independent. We did not depend on foreign oil, and it was a big part of the boom that occurred in the Trump years. Are we now going to go back to this kind of dependence and interaction with international oil interests? This is like it's really short-sighted. Also, I believe that he is stopping any further construction on the border wall, and this is happening at a time when caravans are forming in Central America, moving north, and they're chanting Biden, 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 and we're going to go back to the time when you have a huge incursion of illegal aliens in this country and not registered, bringing with them crime, drugs, everything else. And so, these are really significant developments. I think he's also undoing he's rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, which is nothing but a big fat payoff to international bureaucrats. It doesn't do a damn thing to reduce carbon in the atmosphere. It's sort of we're going to be re-entangling ourselves into the new world order. Whatever they want to call it, the Great Reset, they're calling it now.
Yeah, well, I think that anything Biden does will almost certainly 99.9% be something bad. And America is so already, we're at the precipice. Just what has happened in the last year, 4 years of Trump, which were raised expectations, false hopes, bringing the roaches out. Trump did serve to bring the roaches out into the light. So people that are awake anyhow saw the extent of the corruption and the lockdown.
He didn't do a good enough job. We found out that they were so embedded in his own administration, even in his own White House.
Right,
that he really didn't do that. I mean, that's I criticize Trump for that. I mean, even though he went a long way,
Yeah.
And, he accomplished a lot in spite of them. They still were there sabotaging him at every step of the way,
Yeah.
spying on him,
Right.
dropping a dime
And
on
his
him. I mean, it was just
exactly. And
horrible.
his presence, but just his presence served to bring these people out into the light. And the lockdown served to make, I should make American realize just how horrible the leadership is at all levels, because nobody knew who Lori Lightfoot was before, or the transgender guy from Pennsylvania who's now going to be some big position in
And by the way,
Biden's
if I could,
cabinet.
yeah, this being Levine, I think Marjorie Levine or something.
Levine, yes, yes, yeah.
And let me just say, the issue with them, with him, is that during the lockdown,
Yes.
When certain blue state governors, like in this case, Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania, were putting COVID-19 active people in nursing homes, which to my way of thinking is genocidal.
Yeah.
And we should look at the fact that I think it's at least half of the deaths from COVID came from nursing homes, the most vulnerable population. They were doing that against federal guidelines.
Mhm.
She removed her 95-year-old mother from a nursing home just
Yeah.
before this policy went into effect.
Yeah.
I hope that's brought up during the hearings. I would still like to hear an explanation from their governor, from Cuomo, from Whitmer of Michigan, and from Newsom of California, all of whom did this atrocious policy. And it
Yeah.
was completely unnecessary. I mean, in New York, you had the medical ship, the naval vessel right off the coast in Manhattan Harbor empty.
Yeah.
They could have easily put the COVID people in there. That's what they were there for.
And
Instead, they put them in nursing homes.
and yet we were told, the hospitals were overflowing. They didn't know where to put the bodies, and yet they had that ship there that was empty. And you had Jason Goodman and lots of people going around New York filming in the empty hospitals. So I'm not sure where it was. And just like
No,
I said,
those nursing homes where there was the most vulnerable people. I mean, it's one of
right?
these policies that I think there should be a reckoning. And meanwhile, Cuomo's shelves are groaning under the weight of all the awards he's getting.
Oh, he's an Emmy Award winner. Yeah,
They
sure.
can't carry him. I mean, it's really,
Yeah,
and now that the Biden's in office, I mean, I fear that all of this stuff is going to get swept under the rug. We're
yeah.
never going to see an end to, persecuting anyone who's really looking at corruption.
No,
And
well, then,
yeah, it's just sad. I mean, the whole thing. Look, I mean, again, I respect the fact that he is the president, and I'm loyal to this country because of out of that. But we're returning to the time of mediocrity, of internationalism. We're no longer going to be putting the interests of our own nation first, and they're going to glorify in that. And it's sad. It's such a squandered opportunity that you have this guy like Trump coming out of nowhere and offering his services to the country, and leading an incredibly successful administration by any metric. And he would have been twice as successful if he hadn't had to deal with all these conspiracies against him. And
yeah.
now we're going back to the rotten, old, mediocre days of Obama. I mean, Trump, as he was leaving, he made one comment that I think is really illustrative, in that he pointed out that, he should be credited with creating the vaccine for the COVID-19 virus, and that had Obama been in charge or Biden, we would never have gotten the vaccine that quickly. It would have taken years. It would have probably never happened. And that's what we're getting into now. We're going back to those days where you have this big, fat, corrupt, overstuffed government where people are making rules and laws outside of Congress, and doing so based upon their own fat interests.
Right. And it's again, it's the ascension of identity politics. And the reason identity politics is so dangerous is because it's not liberalism. It's the antithesis of classical liberalism. It basically, it superimposes emotion where reason should prevail. And that's why you see why the Trump legal team failed in 60 of 61 courtrooms, because that's our legal system now.
This is really shocking. I mean, I hope that we continue to research it. I just published a quick book, I mean, I cranked it right out on this subject, called "We Are All Socialists Now: A Deplorable Looks at the 2020 Election," and that we found out that not only was our media completely corrupt, there was no investigation of the voter fraud, other than scorn and mocking. No one looked at the affidavits. No one interviewed the people who were witnesses. No one really looked at the data abnormalities that occurred in those states. Nothing.
Mhm.
Instead, they just simply heaped mockery on anyone who did. And then, of course, we expected to have an independent judiciary on the state and federal level, including the Supreme Court, who would actually hear this evidence and who would bring it into the courtroom where it could be discussed, it could be debated, it could be challenged. We could kick it around and find out what's real. That's what the court system is supposed to do. But the problem is it never reached that far, except in one case, and that was in Wisconsin, where a federal judge did hear the evidence that there were 125,000 ballots unlawfully cast. And his response to it was, well, yes, yeah, I see that, but I'm not going to rule on it because if I did, it might change the outcome of the election.
Yeah.
So, talk about corrupt. I mean, that's like, having a murder trial and saying, oh, well, I'm going to throw this up because we all like this guy. He's popular. He's a rock singer. I don't know. So we're not going to look at the evidence because it's too controversial. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
corrupt.
Yeah, it's the corruption is so, and I think that's one thing that is shown. But again, we have such a divisive country that no matter how corrupt things have proven to be, the people, because of Trump's personality, because he caused this Trump derangement syndrome. The people that have Trump derangement syndrome literally don't care. They did not. They would have supported a military coup. They would have probably cheered if he'd been assassinated. Their hatred for him is beyond belief. They can make jokes about, at that time, his 10-year-old son being in a cage with pedophiles. They make fun of the most beautiful first lady we ever. I mean, just on the surface, she's a former supermodel. I mean, whatever you think of
And
her.
she was never featured on the cover of a major magazine.
Yeah, and they
And never
continue.
interviewed. No one, it's
Yeah.
the first time. I mean, every first lady going back to Martha Washington
Yep.
has had an interview where they ask, what is your favorite, meals and how
Yeah.
hairstyle and
Yeah.
the fashion. Nothing.
No.
Nothing. There was no respect given at all. It was
No,
really despicable.
it wasn't, especially because of the fact she's I mean, America is so superficial typically. So, supermodels are not usually treated that harshly in the media, but
No,
to deny that she's attractive is absurd. And but that's what they do. They actually make fun of her wardrobe and stuff, which is, Matt, try that with Michelle Obama and see how far you get. I mean, this is the double standard is ridiculous. But again, it's part of the left can make fun of people.
what do you think happened? I think that I get the fact that there are two types of Trump haters. I mean, as I see it, there are the insider Trump haters. People like James Comey and Brennan and Clapper. These are people who are conspiring to remove him from office, and because they didn't like his political agenda, not because they didn't like him personally. That doesn't matter. They did not like the fact that he was a nationalist, that he was putting America first. They are internationalists, they're globalists, and they wanted to see the United States continue on merging into a world order. And they were afraid that Trump was going to stop that. He was, and he was going to wake up the country. Plus, they had financial reasons for disliking him. And then you had the rest of the Trump haters, the people that you and I know, not the normies, as I like to call them. They're sucked in by this coordinated media attack, which they were conscious. People like, Rachel Maddow, she knows better. She's fully conscious. She's part of this attempt to destroy Trump for political reasons. But they get wrapped up in this drumbeat of propaganda and almost hypnotic attacks on him daily. And they come to hate him without knowing why. They cannot really articulate it. And the media totally lost its standard of reportage. They would report on one anonymous source. Then the next day they would extract the story in a small print, including the New York Times, and meanwhile the damage was done, and they came up with these false, ridiculous attacks, and they would act on them. I mean, the perfect phone call that led to the impeachment is a perfect example. I mean, it's just the most corrupt thing that I've ever seen. I remember all three networks did a major story on Donald Trump ordering an extra scoop of ice cream at a state dinner. Why was this a story? I mean, who
Yeah,
cares? It's like this, somehow this is supposed to be seen as bad. Anyway,
exactly.
it's just, and meanwhile, there's real stories going on that were completely ignored.
No, and then again, it's all because his personality. The left is so inconsistent. The double standards are so glaring, but you can't. It doesn't matter. You can play. I mean, look, I posted something online last week or something where I have a pretty big following in social media, and I found a story about the Black Panthers. 24 fully armed Black Panthers with assault weapons marched into the Sacramento, California state capitol in 1967. State capitol. That looked a lot more like an insurrection than what we saw on January 6th.
Mm.
And this is during a time of real racism, when white privilege did exist, and when there were white supremacists. Everybody that was a different time. What happened was, surely I said they must have been hung in the public square, executed on the spot. I mean, something must have happened, right? Nothing. The police calmly talked to them and took their weapons and sent them on their merry way. No, they didn't even get a fine. And I tried to, and all I got was no comparisons, apples to oranges. Well, yeah, it's no comparison because there are 24 Black people with weapons. So you can't say anything because of political correctness. But if that was, and if that was I said, what happened on January 6th, if nothing changed, everything else was identical, whatever it was, however many infiltrators, whatever it was, if the only thing that changed was that the people were there for a Black Lives Matter rally and they marched into the Capitol under that banner, no one would, if you had called it an insurrection, you would have been called a traitor. I mean,
Yeah,
they
I mean, they last summer they burned St. John's Church down,
yes, yeah,
which every president since Madison has prayed at that church. I think with the exception of Kennedy because he's Catholic, but and Trump went out for a show of force to say we're not going to be cowed by this, and he stood up and held up a Bible in front of it, saying that this is
yeah.
a religious institution, and somehow they keep showing this as
He was ridiculed. Yeah.
but why? They don't explain why. It's just somehow because it's Trump, this is seen as something bad. It's almost like they're almost throwing up into our face the level of brainwashing. Anyways, Donald Jeffries, talk about your books and where people can find out more about your excellent work. You've got a fascinating shelf of books up there at Amazon Books.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to have another book coming out later this year, which is about showbiz.
Oh,
Hadn't been
good.
published yet. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about corruption there. It'd be called On Borrowed Fame, but they look for that down the road. But my latest book is Bullyocracy, about bullying in schools, how the social hierarchy enables bullies to rule schools, workplaces, and society at large. Very pertinent time, very relevant to today. Survival of the Rich is my economic book, and my two big sellers are Hidden History and Crimes and Cover-Ups. And I'll be working on Hidden History 3 as well. That's the ones people want. They love the conspiracy books about history. So they're easy to find. My blog is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. You can find me at Don Jeffries on Twitter. I'm easy to find out there. If you Google me, you'll find probably more than you want to.
All right. Well, Donald Jeffries, I want to thank you as always for joining me this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Charles.
All right. Take care.
Take care. You too.
All right.
Yeah, bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.